Starship is going to be a very big rocket, with almost double the engine thrust of the Saturn V and an enormous payload bay. It is set to revolutionize the spaceflight industry, we all know that. But isn't it a little overkill? Is there actually anyone that needs a ship that big? Won't it just sit around waiting for clients who don't really need 100 tons to LEO and are perfectly satisfied with 10? Hi everyone, I'm back after quite a break. Today I'm asking if there are any satellites for Starship and looking at the satellite market in general. We will go through the Starship capabilities, some interesting market statistics, alternatives, and currently planned Starship missions. Let's dive right in. Let's start with an important disclaimer. SpaceX's Starship is of course still in development, and some numbers will almost definitely change. Just recently there has been information about SpaceX planning to add hot staging to the beast, which may have a big impact. I'm using mostly the numbers from the latest Starship User's Guide, which was released in March 2020. Firstly, Starship will not necessarily be that revolutionary in terms of payload bay height, although it is high, standing at 22 meters. The Vulcan Centaur long configuration also reaches 21.3 meters. The highly unusual thing is its enormous payload width of 8 meters. No rocket is really coming close to that. Ariane 5 is 4.57 meters, Falcons are 5, and the Vulcan is 5.4 meters wide. Thanks to the height, every meter width translates to a ton of volume being made available, which is highly important if you want to do rideshare and constellations. Especially if you have a lot of power to spare, and Starship will definitely have that. It is projected that in its reusable form, Starship will be able to haul over an astounding 150 tons to LEO, 100 plus in the file from 2020. However, due to its large size and lack of a third stage, its capabilities drop quickly beyond that, with 21 tons to the geostationary transfer orbit. Moon is really out of the question without an orbital propellant transfer. With it, the possibilities are huge, but the costs are also rising. Instead of launching one rocket, you are now launching 3, 5 or maybe even 16 rockets, depending on the final performance and destination. But rolling back a bit, a Falcon Heavy with its core expanded can haul even 57 tons to LEO, and if you expand all of it, it can even bring more to GTO than Starship, 26,700 kilograms to be precise. And even with those incredible capabilities, we have only ever seen 7 Falcon Heavy launches, far less than Falcon 9. Some have expressed their concerns about the need for a vehicle like Starship right now in the commercial space. Here is a tweet from Tori Bruno. There is not currently a market for 150 metric tons to LEO every week. Mr. Bruno has also pointed out that the initial impact of Starship will be on the proliferated low Earth orbit market, so satellite constellations. Will Starship face the same fate as Falcon Heavy and have no clients for a long while? To understand it better, let's look at some figures on the current market. I took the data for all the charts from the Union of Concerned Scientists dataset, which contains all the satellites that were in orbit as of January 1st, 2023. Worth to point out that the set does not include the orbited satellites. The link for it is in the description. So, at the date of the file, there were 6,718 satellites in orbit, which can be divided into 4 major categories. Those are communication, Earth observation, navigation, and research. Unsurprisingly, communication dominates space, even if we do not consider the Starlink satellites, which of course are already controlled by SpaceX. Then, communications and Earth observation account together for the majority of what is out there, with 43 and 34% respectively. This is significant as many of the communication satellites are internet providers, which are in competition with SpaceX, although it is not completely impossible for them to launch such, which we have seen with the OneWeb launch on top of the Falcon. Next up is tech demo and development, which combined have 14.5%. Navigation and science are surprisingly a very small portion of the market, with 4 and 3% respectively. Other uses right now represent very few of the launches and are often rideshare, so are not that significant for the planning of such large vehicle. However, in-orbit manufacturing, private space stations and perhaps energy generation are interesting uses worth keeping an eye on. It is likely that they will see an increase in numbers. As a side note, let's also see who is launching all those satellites. Thanks to Starlink, the US is of course firmly in the lead. However, taking it away, China and UK also control significant numbers. We don't expect to see SpaceX launching Chinese and Russian satellites anytime soon, which is already 23% of satellites gone. Of course, assuming stable ratios, which is not the case. The operators of those satellites are a more interesting story, with SpaceX already controlling half of all space metal boxes. OneWeb follows, currently under UK ownership, and Planet Labs comes in third. They are Earth observation capability providers. Still, needless to say, sheer numbers don't translate into launch profitability. Some satellites are more expensive to launch than others. Soon, Amazon's Project Kuiper will join this ranking. It is expected to launch 3,236 satellites, half of them before 2026, to compete with Starlink. Those, however, will be launched by the ULA Vulcan, Ariane 6 and the New Glenn, not Starship. As Starship is to be an LEO monster with up to 150 tons capability, let's look at what is currently at the LEO. Turns out, the vast majority of satellites that are there are very far from filling Starship's capabilities. The heaviest payloads of the USA's National Reconnaissance Office don't cross the weight of 20 tons, which is well within the mass capabilities of the Falcon Heavy. In fact, if you wanted to use Starship to haul everything that is in LEO right now, talking just in terms of mass, not the orbital differences, and actually assuming the lower capability of 100 tons from the user guide from 2020, it would take just 19 Starships to do so. Heard me right, just 19. For the GEO situation is a bit different. The capabilities of Starship don't really put it ahead of the competition in that market, and are similar to what is offered right now mass-wise. You need the refueling capability to hold significant cargo there, which of course raises costs and is not proven yet. Note the difference between the GTO and the GEO in the performance sheet. If we look at the approximation of rocket payloads in kilograms put in space on one day that were still in orbit at the end of 2022, we can notice that right now it is actually a very rare occurrence for payloads to weigh over 10 tons. Also, when they do so, it is very often a Starlink launch. Those charts may be a bit exaggerated by the inclusion of older sats, but this is another clue that right now, even though we have the capability to launch a bit larger payloads, that does not seem to be the biggest market, hinting at there being lots of space for smaller launch providers. A quick look at what is available among the big rockets right now might also provide us with some market insight. At the current state of affairs, you can't choose the Delta IV Heavy, as there are no more launches available, same with the Atlas V. An obvious choice would be the Falcon Heavy, costing $150 million in its fully expandable form and 90 mils in a reusable, able to carry 63 and 30 tons to LEO respectively. Nevertheless, as I stated earlier, it turns out that it has had only 7 launches since its introduction in 2018, with a 2-year break in 2020 and 2021, while Falcon 9 has had 200 launches in the same time frame, so since Heavy's maiden flight. We have got to ask why that is. It seems that right now there are just not that many payloads requiring the power of a rocket such as the Falcon Heavy going around. Another issue is the small fairing size of the Falcon Heavy, which despite the large power stays the same as the Falcon 9. Especially for the LEO, it is hard to pack up that much mass into such a small space. The Starlink launchers, for example, jam-pack the entire fairing, and are still light enough for the Falcon 9. Although the extended fairing is in the works, we are still not sure about its timeline and if it will be useful outside of the few military missions and the Lunar Gateway. Perhaps it will increase the number of Falcon Heavy launches. But even if there will be enough satellite missions for a monster like the Starship, the upcoming competition should not be ignored. ULA's Vulcan is to be priced around $110 million per launch, and there is a chance it will be operational before Starship. Ariane 6, on the other hand, is to sell from 75 million euros to 126, while also being capable enough for most of the current missions. Since all have the capabilities for the current market, the decisive factor in the launcher choice will oftentimes end up being the price. And although we have some idea about the cost of a Starship mission, they may end up being much higher, especially in the beginning of the operations. We won't know the actual price of the Starship until SpaceX starts openly selling it. In the past, Elon mentioned a figure of $10 million per launch, with $2 million of it being variable costs of fuel and ground handling. There are some asterisks to those numbers, the first one being the source of this information, Elon Musk. The cost of fuel is easy to verify, however the rest of the cost is more insider knowledge. We all know that oftentimes the information Musk tweets out is a bit premature and too confident, and I would not be surprised if this is also the case here. If the market is not ready for Starship, why go away from a lot of profit? SpaceX could charge way more and still be ahead of the competition, and I believe they will. Then the price also depends on how much you can reuse the Starship, and it is not a given that SpaceX will be able to reuse it immediately. There is still a lot to learn for that. Is the heat shield going to be enough? Can they reliably land Starship and the Super Heavy on the freaking launch tower? What happens if such a landing goes south? A lot of the infrastructure would be damaged. And then if they manage to reuse the ship, now how many such reuses can it handle with the design at hand? All those steps will affect the possible pricing. I don't doubt they will figure those things out, the question is how long will it take? It has been speculated by enthusiasts online that the construction of one rocket costs something between $20 and $25 million. If you can launch but can't recover the vehicle yet, the costs of missions that require refuelings quickly pile up. At this point, it may still be a better option to go for the competition, and as I said, so far there aren't many missions going around. But all of that is not to say that Starship will meet the same fate as Falcon Heavy and have no real clients for a while. There are in fact missions that only the Starship can handle, and some that already believe it to be the best option, regardless of complications. Those missions will be taking a lot of the capacity until the market catches up. Let's explore what they are. The first is the obvious internal customer, Starlink. SpaceX has wanted to upgrade to their new Starlink V2 satellites for a while, but couldn't as their size makes it impractical to put them on the Falcon. In the meantime, as Starship is not ready to deploy them, SpaceX has launched some Starlink V2 mini satellites on board Falcon 9. It is expected that the first payloads of Starship will in fact be Starlink satellites, as SpaceX is not risking much having them as payload. Starship, as stated earlier, is an LEO monster, and setting up mega constellations is one of the best of its uses. The question here is if Starlink is bringing enough money to support Starship almost on its own for a while. As SpaceX is privately owned, we can of course only speculate on that. However, SpaceX's COO Gwen Shotwell has stated in 2022 that Starlink has had a positive cash flow quarter. Hopefully, Starlink brings in enough revenue to fund future development. It is not necessary to have refueling and even landing mastered to start deploying the V2s. The second certain customer are the Artemis missions, which NASA has already contracted to SpaceX in 2021. The exact number of those is a bit unclear. Every Starship going to the moon needs anywhere from 8 to 16 refueling Starships to be launched. SpaceX is to launch astronauts on the moon as part of Artemis 3 and will have to perform a successful uncrewed landing first. There also is the Dear Moon flyby planned with the Starship, paid for by Yusaku Maezawa, with Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut, also scheduled to fly on it, and another lunar flyby later with Dennis and Akiko Tito having already bought seats for it. As for cargo missions, Astrolab has signed an agreement with SpaceX to fly their lunar rover to the moon, which will host a variety of payloads from different institutions. How this mission will work out is unclear, as it is said to be a potential rideshare to the moon. However, it is certain that it will also require refuelings on the way. A bit earlier than that, Sky Perfect JSAT has selected Starship to deliver their SuperBird 9 communication satellite to the geostationary transfer orbit. This payload, however, does not seem to fully utilize the capabilities of the Starship, and is more of a bid on Starship being cheaper than other launchers. Sky Perfect JSAT did not reveal the expected mass of the satellite, but other satellites using the same bus from Airbus are expected to weigh about 3 tons, much less than the 21 tons the Starship is expected to be able to haul. It is possible that the payload will be moved from the Starship to Falcon if the company is uncertain about its capabilities or meeting the 2024 launch date. This would be it for the currently discussed missions, but there is a series of projects which are not yet in full development, yet are intended to be flown on the Starship. Their futures are still relatively uncertain, but they serve as examples of the potential Starship payloads. Due to its LEO capability, Starship would be the best of its kind to deliver huge space station modules to orbit. Vast Space is one of the companies intending to use it for this. The company is fully funded by a billionaire founder, Jed McCaleb, with a Forbes net worth of $2.4 billion, mostly known for web and crypto projects including Ripple and Mt. Gox exchange. So the money for the first steps is there. Their plan is to first launch some technology development missions and then a small single module space station on a Falcon 9. If they succeed in that, a large Starship-class module will follow. This would fully utilize Starship's wide payload bay and the mass to LEO. It is possible that more companies will follow, as the cost of creating your own space station will go down and the benefits are proven. Another potential use is the development of solar energy in space, and there is a bunch of stakeholders investigating that already. One of the interesting companies in the field is Virtus Solis, which has done a breakdown of a cost of a megawatt-hour per the number of Starship reuses, showing what is necessary to make it feasible. Other interested parties include Caltech and the US military, which have launched some technology demonstrators. The European Space Agency is also on the hype train with the Solaris initiative, and there also has been some funding put to the task in the UK. For projects like this, you really need a cheap next generation of rockets, more specifically the Starship. Gathering all of the mentioned information, it can be said that the current satellite market is not geared toward the Starship, and it would be very weird if it was. Nobody will bet on building a satellite which only fits such a unique, unproven vehicle. It will take some time for the manufacturers and projects to catch up to the design and fully utilize the new possibilities. There are no payloads except Starlink coming even close to that right now. But regardless of that, Starship will still be competitive, even with payloads that don't take full advantage of its power. The missions that are already contracted require many refuelings, which will give SpaceX the opportunity to learn and master the design, lowering the launch costs. This will definitely not be a case of the Falcon Heavy sitting around with few clients. The future is very promising, with incredible projects being enabled for the first time in history, and I can't wait to see it all unfold. If you're equally excited as I am, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment on what Starship task you are the most excited about. More content will be coming your way. See you!